Good day, everyone. My name is Sihle Boyo, and I am the project manager for the African Climate Action Partnership. And on behalf of the Growing Government Engagement in Energy Access Project, which is co-delivered by the African Association for Rural Electrification, CLABIAR in short, and the African Climate Action Partnership, which is FCAP, would like to welcome you all. And thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar titled Analyzing the Potential to Unlock the Energy Agriculture Synergies, which is carried under the webinar series that is also titled Techno-economic and Business Model Foundations for Productive Use of Energy in Mini-Grids in Africa. So I'm just going to speak on the agenda of the day, and then I will speak on introduction, then will be followed by introduction to GGE-EA, which will be presented by Harry, and then it'll be followed by team from NREL, he's going to give us an overview of clean and advanced technologies for sustainable landscapes, analytical approach, and tools. Thereafter, we'll have our question and answer moment or section. Basically, if anyone has questions for the presentations, that's where you're going to be dropping your questions, which you can drop in the chat box, or you can just raise your hand and then we'll see you and then we'll unmute and then you can speak. Then we'll have our discussions where we have like guided questions, but we'll see them when we get to that point, and then we're followed by closing and final remarks. So just for housekeeping, for starters, introductions, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box. You can let us know where you're from and your organizations. And should you have any questions, please feel free, or during someone's presentation, please feel free to drop them on the chat box, or you can wait and then you can ask your questions during the Q&A session. And please remain on mute when someone is presenting or speaking, just to avoid distractions. And then, yeah, that's about it. And then in the meantime, just to prepare Harry for his presentation, but please feel free to introduce yourself right now in the chat box, and you can say where you're from and your organizations. So yes, the next slide, please, which will be Harry's presentation. I hand over, or the floor is yours, Harry. You can go ahead and present the introduction of GGE-EA.
Thank you, Sigle. My name is Harry Reta from CLABIAR, African Association for Rural Education. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, good afternoon, good morning. That depends on wherever you are. Before the conference, I want to talk a little bit about the organizer of this event, our project, and the implement team. GGE-EA, Growing Government Engagement in Energy Access, is a part of transforming energy access program powered by Carbon Trust and funded by UK Aid. GGE-EA is a key partnership between CLABIAR and SSN, South of North African Mini-Grids Community of Practice, under the African Climate Action Partnership, formerly the Africa Leads Partnership, based in Cape Town. The GGE-EA project aims to expand its source of capacity building program, targeting public officials. It means ministries, local government, rural education agencies for the off-grid sector. It aims to improve data sets for our work packet 2. It aims to improve data sets understanding of why mini-grids project fail and foster greater public-private engagement to ensure more backable mini-grid projects are developed. The project intends to benefit rural communities within sub-Saharan Africa through the provision of affordable and reliable energy access. GGE-EA will aim to include the notion of inclusivity in energy access to promote the Sustainable Development Goals number 7, To building the capacity of public sector officials and decision makers, this project seeks to create an enabling environment in governments for the large-scale implementation of mini grids to facilitate enhanced energy access in sub-Saharan Africa. The intent also impact is to increase the use of affordable, decentralized, clean energy options for poor households and enterprises in sub-Saharan Africa. As activities, the GGE has organized some online courses and webinars. The project has planned workshop and roundtable discussion with all players, including private sectors, funder group, and civil society. The project will publish knowledge document on key lessons from its activities. As I mentioned before, GGE-EA is implemented by South of North and the CLABIA. South of North supports national and regional responses to climate change through policy and knowledge interventions, partnerships, and deep collaboration. SSN does this connecting people and information, enhancing capabilities, and mobilizing resources to respond innovatively to the challenges and opportunities that climate change presents. Being positioned in the global south effort, SSN a deeper understanding of and connection to the climate and development challenges facing the region. South of North assesses developing countries access to climate information by brokering climate knowledge through formalized exchange among various stakeholders. South of North also assists decision makers in developing climate-compatible development by informing policies, formulation, and implementation. About African Climate Action Partnership, the African Climate Action Partnership, formerly known as the Africa-led Partnership, brings together representatives from governments, civil society, and the private sector working to advance low-emission development strategies across the continent. Under the umbrella of Global Climate Action Partnership and alongside the other regional platforms in Asia and Latin America and Caribbean, the FCAP works to address lead priorities and challenges specific to Africa through peer-to-peer learning and engagement. The Secretariat based at South of North provides a platform for individuals and organizations from public, private, and non-governmental sectors to share experiences, knowledge, lessons learned, and best practices, and to collaborate, coordinate, or lead designs and implementation. We are leads Africa Climate Action Partnership also endeavor to facilitate engagement and linkages across networks and initiatives, thus contributing to the achievement of partnership objectives. For those who need some details, LEADS means low emission development strategies. And last but not least, about CLABIA, the African Association for Rural Education, CLABIA, is a bilingual network, English and French, which brings together about 40 agencies and structures in charge of rural education in 35 countries of the continent. By pooling know-how and feedback from its members, the CLABIA aims to strengthen the capacity of African institutions of rural education and finding appropriate solution to this problem. CLABIA aims to accelerate the development of access to electricity services in rural areas in Africa by creating the relevant framework conditions and by systemizing the beneficial sharing of experiences between agencies and structures responsible for rural education. The idea is to actively participate in achieving SDG 7 and sustainable energy for all purpose. Our vision and mission translate into the following three objectives: capacity building, development of capacity and skills, capitalization and management of knowledge and communication, and resources mobilization. That is all the information I wish to give you. Before I turn back to the moderator, just a big thank to our speaker today, Tim from NREL. And have a good time with us during this webinar. I thank you for your attention. And I will now turn the floor back to Sigley. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry, so much for the presentation. Yes. So if anyone has any question or comments or would like to know any more information on GGE and their work packages, please feel free also to ask away in the chat box. But for now, team from NREL, who's going to be speaking on overview of clean and advanced technologies for sustainable landscapes, analytic and analytic approach and tools. So the floor is yours.
Super. Thank you, Harry, and thank you, Sile. Hopefully everybody is seeing my screen okay here. Let me know if you're not.
Perfect.
Okay, wonderful. Well, super. Well, thanks so much, everyone, again for joining today. Really excited to have the opportunity to be here with everyone. So as Sile mentioned, my name is Tim Reber. I serve as a project lead based out here at the foot of the Rocky Mountains in Denver, Colorado. Today, going to run through a recent project that NREL completed with funding from the U.S. Department of State called Clean and Advanced Technologies for Sustainable Landscapes. And what this project did was really try to take a holistic look at understanding what and where are the opportunities for specifically electrifying productive uses in the agricultural sector. So looking at things like irrigation, maize milling, refrigeration, etc. Understanding where are these opportunities, what is the scale of these opportunities, and then taking that and looking at how can electrifying these productive uses help make mini grids, specifically clean energy mini grids, a little bit more viable. So in terms of today, I'm going to run through, sort of break this down into three sections. First, wanted to provide just a bit of a very brief framing conversation on productive uses. Why are we talking about productive uses? What are they? What is the impact of productive uses on economic development, and particularly on mini grid economics? And then move into a very, very brief high-level overview of the approach that we took to estimate agricultural productive use demand. And then finally, what we did with those estimates in terms of using that to help us sort of screen for how tapping into some of these productive uses helps improve mini grid viability. So I have quite a few slides here. I'm probably going to move fairly quickly. We do have a report available that we can share afterwards. It really goes into detail on the methodologies and approaches, and of course we'll share the slides as well for those who want to review them afterwards. We're always available. We'll have the recording, so please don't worry if it seems like I'm moving rather quickly. So in terms of framing up productive uses, I usually think it's very helpful to start by breaking down what does a typical utility business model look like. And this is very, very simple diagram here. I think for a lot of folks, this is probably review, but in its essence, a mini grid operates much like any other business might. You have investors, which can either be private sector folks, banks, communities, or in many cases, federal governments, as well as donors who are providing necessary capital to a mini grid developer and or operator, who's then expected to take that investment, build out the infrastructure, generation, distribution, etc., that provides electricity to consumers. In return, those consumers, of course, pay for the electricity, and in theory, much of that is reinvested into operations and maintenance, and some of that is sent back to investors as returns. When we get to looking at mini grids, as opposed to, for example, a traditional large state utility, this sort of basic logic for what makes a utility, what makes a mini grid financially viable starts to break down. There's two reasons for this. One, of course, on the cost side of things. When we're talking about remote communities, agricultural communities, we're usually talking about folks who are very from the grid, so that increases your costs. Infrastructure to get out to those communities might be limited. Typically, people are spread out a little bit more, so you have to invest more in, for example, infrastructure to distribute electricity to folks, and typically the cost of finance is pretty high. On the other side, when you're looking at the revenue side of the equation, we're often working with folks who maybe have more inconsistent cash flows, which can create increased risk for microgrid developers. Lower demand. If you're operating a microgrid, selling electricity is your business, electricity is your product, and the more you're able to sell, the more financially viable your operation will be. And so we need to think about how can we really increase demand. So this sort of basic premise for what makes these utilities operational and financially viable starts to break down. There are a lot of things we can do, fortunately, to sort of address this viability gap here, this difference between costs and revenue. Of course, you can work to decrease costs by things like looking at your technology, reducing your technology costs. Many cases, you'll look at subsidizing, maybe with donor funds or federal funds in order to help increase those revenues. And then there in the middle, there are a lot of things we can do to increase revenue. And so today we're going to focus specifically on these ones that I've highlighted here and circled here in red, increasing overall consumption so that you just have more product to sell and tapping into some of these alternative revenue streams. So when we're talking about productive uses, what exactly does this mean? Well, at its simplest, productive use is really any activity that generates income or increases productivity to create economic value. So I think many of you are familiar with what we're talking about here. This is anything from primary industries like agriculture, timber, fishing, carpentry, retail enterprises, and even community services like schools, clinics, churches, etc. It's really anything that creates an added value for a local community. Today, though, we're specifically going to be focusing on productive use to increase agricultural production. So what we're talking about here are things like irrigation, pumping, grain milling, incubation for eggs and other products, cold storage for dairy, meat, livestock, and other sort of agricultural productive uses. And really, there are two key benefits here. One, these activities, by their very nature, create an additional value addition step within sort of the agricultural production chain that often benefits local communities, increases crop yields, reduces waste, provides opportunities to create additional value adds that you're really helping boost local economic impacts that stay within the community. The second benefit is working to create that additional electricity demand, so increasing electricity consumption for the community that helps create a stronger, more robust base of business for a mini grid. And it's the second piece here that we're really focusing on through the analysis. And for today is looking at how can tapping into these productive uses and thereby increasing electricity demand across the continent really help make mini grids a more viable and attractive investment for mini grid developers and investors. And so to kind of take this one step further about why increasing this consumption is really important, it's helpful to break down what a typical what we call demand curve for a mini grid might look like. And this is what showing on screen here. So if you take just sort of a traditional community, maybe relying mostly on just residential electricity consumption, what we see is that we often will have sort of a spike in electricity demand in the evening. And that's what you're seeing here within the blue line here in this graph. And that maybe electricity consumption is fairly low during the day while people are out at work, going about their days, the sun's shining, it's hot out. And then everybody comes home and you get this big spike when folks come home, they turn on their radios, they start cooking, they turn on their lights, etc. as the sun's going down, and we get this big spike. And so you can see here on the right, and that red dotted line, if you're building a mini grid, you have to be able to build a mini grid in order to meet that spike in demand there in the evening. But largely throughout the day, you're only utilizing maybe 25–30% of your total mini grid capacity just because you don't have that consumption there. And so you're not really able to, from the mini grid developer perspective, you're not able to sell your product, so to speak. And so you're kind of wasting a lot of that investment as it's just sort of sitting idle. So if we look at what happens now, if we add in some of these productive uses, for example, we add in maybe a maize mill that can be used during the day, and some irrigation pumping where irrigation is being pumped in the middle of the day while the sun's shining. It helps to sort of increase this overall consumption pattern, this demand curve or load profile as we call it, and kind of fills in those valleys during the day so that from the mini-grid developer's perspective, you're able to utilize a lot more of the electricity and therefore able to sell a lot more of the electricity that you're producing. And that means that you're going to have more revenue and really have a more viable microgrid. And so if we look at these two load profiles, we can actually do some real quantitative analysis and understand how this impacts the economics of a mini grid. And so what we're seeing here is some analysis that NREL has done looking at just this. On the left side here of these three different scenarios is looking at just a sort of this residential only scenario of a community that really isn't tapping into these productive uses. And then on the right side bar there for the comparison case for each of these scenarios, we have added in some of these daytime productive uses like a maize mill, like some irrigation pumping. And we've done this analysis to look at what are the ultimate levelized cost of electricity here for your mini grid. And we see that across the board, tapping into these really helps reduce the ultimate cost of your system, increases your revenues, and means you can effectively charge consumers less per unit of electricity because you're able to sell more of it as you're recouping your costs. And so that's what we're seeing here is that this LCOE that you see on the left side, levelized cost of electricity, can effectively be considered sort of the tariff that you would have to charge your consumers and able to recoup your costs and make your mini grid viable. And that comes down across the board when we start adding in some of these agricultural productive uses. So that's really the main takeaway here. So I know that's very quick, but I think helpful framing of why we care about sort of the electricity demand so much, and why this boosting this electricity demand and sort of the timing of that really is important for the economics of a mini grid. I'm sure we could do an entire webinar series just on that, but just wanted to provide that very quick sort of foundation to help the rest of this conversation make a little bit more sense. So with that framing, what has NREL done? What have we done to look at how do we analyze what these opportunities are? And this is where this project, the Clean Technologies for Sustainable Landscapes, or CTSL project, comes into play. What we did was we took a two-step process here. One, looking at mapping out where are the opportunities for agricultural productive use? What are those opportunities? And how can we start to get an estimate of the scale of those opportunities? How much untapped need for some of these agricultural processes is there across the continent that if we were to tap it, we might be able to increase overall electricity demand and thus make mini grids more viable in some of these areas. And we took an analytical approach here, mapped this out across the continent so we could start getting a little bit more of a visual picture of it. And then number two, which I'll go into in the second half here, was looking at how this increased demand could potentially make mini grids more viable. And so we did a bit of a screening process and some analysis of some hypothetical microgrids to understand just what the impacts of tapping into these agricultural productive uses might be. So I'll start here with the geospatial mapping and the estimates of agricultural demand. I want to say a lot of the work that was done here under this CTSL project, we're really grateful to our partners. We work very closely with partners both in Kenya and in Zambia as sort of pilot case studies for some of this work. I know we have a lot of folks on here from elsewhere. I saw several folks from Nigeria, Tanzania, Madagascar, Malawi. I know we've got folks from several countries represented. So also want to preface this with saying a lot of this work was focused on piloting this approach in Kenya and Zambia. But we're really excited to work with all of you on maybe piloting similar approaches and methodologies in some of your own countries as well. And again, as I mentioned, a lot of the methodology and approach that I'm going to be presenting here has been published in a paper, so we'll be sure to share this for those of you who really want to dig down into the weeds of how we did some of this work and get into the nitty-gritty. But I'll be giving just a very, very quick high-level overview here today. But there are these resources available for those who want to understand exactly what went into some of this analysis. So, without any further ado, we estimated 7 different agricultural end uses or productive uses across 15 different crops for the entire continent. Of course, we know there's a lot more than 15 crops being grown across Africa, certainly more than 7 different types of productive uses. But we wanted to pick those that really seem to represent the biggest and strongest opportunities. And so we looked at everything from irrigation, for growing and increasing yields for crops, cold storage for dairy, egg incubation for poultry, and then a variety of different sort of post-processing agricultural productive uses: milling, shelling, hulling, and oil pressing. And what we did was we took these, looked at this agricultural production across these different 15 agricultural products. And we broke them down. We broke the entire continent down into basically a massive grid, basically looking at 10 by 10 kilometer, so 100 square kilometer sort of plots across the entire continent. We're looking at Kenya here right now, just as an example, and mapped out where are these agricultural products being produced, so that we could estimate at this geospatial resolution what is the total potential electricity demand were we to start adopting all of these different agricultural productive uses. Won't spend too much time going into this, but for those who are planning on looking at the slides later, we drew from a handful of global data sets, everything from global maps of crop production and areas under different agricultural products, livestock data sets about where are their poultry, chickens, where are their dairy cows and other livestock products, climate data sets, as well as data sets on precipitation to help us understand needs for irrigation. So a lot of different data sets that all went into this analysis here, and you can access these all through these links. So I'm going to provide just 2 examples out of the 15. Don't want to get into too much of the detail, but just to help provide an understanding for sort of what went into this analysis. So if we're looking, for example, at irrigation pumping, effectively, we looked at one of these sort of 100 square kilometer grids across the continent, looked at what crops are being grown there. Based on our understanding of agriculture, what is the water requirements to grow those crops? What is the seasonality of those requirements? Because certainly we understand crops have different growing seasons, wet and dry seasons, and it's not consistent throughout the year. So looked at seasonality, looked at the total water requirements as well as the precipitation yields to understand how much additional water is going to be required through irrigation to grow these crops. From that, we plug that into to a tool looking at what are the energy requirements, electricity requirements of a typical, for example, irrigation pump, considering how deep many aquifers are in order to pump up some water for this irrigation to get at a very rough estimate of the total electricity demand for irrigation. And again, this is an analysis that we did across every single one of these sort of 10 by 10 kilometer grid cells for the entire continent to get sort of the spatial map of estimated irrigation demand for each of these different crops. Another example, for example, for dairy refrigeration for milk, we had this data set estimating the number of livestock heads across the continent at a geospatial level. So looked at based on how many livestock there are, based on our estimates, which we received from our colleagues in Zambia, for example, what is the typical breakdown of meat versus dairy and milk producing livestock? What is a typical milk production for a milk producing cow? And then estimating based on a certain liter of milk, how is required to keep a typical liter of milk refrigerated for several days before that milk can go out to market. and used all of those inputs to estimate what is the estimated load for milk refrigeration. So those are just two very, very quick examples. Again, the report that we published goes into much more detail about how exactly this was done, but wanted to provide just a very high-level overview of some of the methodology and approach. We repeated similar methodologies for all 7 of these agricultural productive uses, and again, broke it down specifically by these 15 different agricultural products that we were evaluating. So ran these sorts of analyses thousands of times for each one of these grid cells across the entire continent, ultimately to come up with a map for the continent that really estimates what is the total agricultural productive use demand. There are a lot of caveats with this. For example, the map we're looking at here looks at just total annual energy use. We have broken it down into monthly energy use because of the important seasonality of this. We even broke this down further into estimating out these sort of daily profiles and considering time of use, which we'll talk about briefly a little bit later. But we have this map now produced, now available, that helps us estimate and be able to start to visualize what is and where is this total agricultural productive use potential demand. What we can see is from our estimates, we're looking at almost 17 terawatt hours per year of electricity for agricultural productive uses that's maybe currently not being met. It's equivalent to about 2.5% of the total electricity generated across all of Africa in 2020. So not insignificant, pretty sizable use there. And again, looking at it at this geospatial level. We have also uploaded this into the RE Data Explorer, which is a tool that NREL has developed and maintained, actually thanks to our friends over at the U.S. Agency for International Development. We've broken this down. We have these maps up there for every single one of these different productive uses. So here we're looking at just the total demand across all productive uses aggregated up. But if we go into RE Data Explorer, you can see a link down there at the bottom of the slide. You can actually go in and access different productive uses and look specifically at maize irrigation or livestock, dairy refrigeration, or just at egg incubation. So if there's specific productive uses that you're interested in, those map layers are up there and available, and you can go in and look and see exactly where we estimate there maybe are high needs for some of these productive uses that aren't being used. And we can use this to help screen and identify maybe where should we be looking for mini grid opportunities. So that was on the demand estimation side. Again, a lot that went into that, and we're happy to share the paper for those who'd like to know more about the specific methodology. But the main takeaway is we now have these maps available online completely free of charge that will help understand from this geospatial perspective sort of where are these productive uses and what is the relative scale and potential for those. So second step here is, great, what do we do with this? Why do we care? Why did we bother even doing these assessments? And so step 2 here was really to go through a deeper dive case study. And again, we look specifically at Kenya and Zambia to start screening, okay, based on this new information about where we think these agricultural productive uses are, how can this help us understand where should we maybe be going to look to develop new energy infrastructure so that we can develop out clean energy infrastructure that actually meets and can serve these agricultural productive uses. And so that's exactly what we did through CTSL. Again, this Clean Technologies for Sustainable Landscapes project in step 2 here was taking these agricultural productive use maps and trying to do this screening to help down select and understand what is the potential impact on clean energy mini grids were we to develop out some of these productive uses. And we did this using NREL's REOPT mini grid optimization tool. And so a quick overview of sort of the approach and methodology here. So again, for each one of these 100 square kilometer cells across the entire continent, we start by estimating out the hourly productive use. So through step one, you saw we developed out these annual and monthly estimates of agricultural productive use in order to actually optimize for the mini grid. If you recall from the first section, understanding the usage patterns throughout the day is really important, because that's ultimately what affects your mini grid economics. And so we took out and we estimated these hourly profiles for productive use demand, as well as looking at resource data. So fortunately, again, thanks to our friends at USAID, we have these solar PV and wind production and other renewable energy resource maps that we can overlay with this demand to understand where does demand for electricity and where do renewable energy resources overlap in a nice complementary way to really help make our mini grids more viable. To this, we added in typical costs for microgrid components, things like solar PV, diesel generation, diesel fuel costs, the cost of land, etc. And we took all of these inputs and put them into this REOPT tool, which again is a free open source tool that's available online that NREL often uses to optimize and do a very high level sort of techno-economic feasibility analysis of a single mini grid system. And from this, for each of these grid cells, each one of these 100 square kilometer cell units that we were using, we were able to understand if we were to go out and put a representative mini grid into that area, based on the agricultural productive use requirements, based on the renewable energy resources, based on population and thus community and residential demand, we can come up with sort of an estimated cost as well as levelized cost of electricity for these sort of hypothetical mini grids. So one of the things I mentioned is that it's really important when we're talking about mini grid economics is to understand sort of the daily patterns. And able to do this because the agricultural productive use estimates we developed were really done at an annual and monthly basis. We had to estimate what would a typical daily use pattern look like? And so for each one of the productive uses we bin them into one of 4 pools. For things like shelling, hulling, pressing, milling, we assume that those typically would be operating at most during the day. For example, when your sun is shining to take advantage of really strong solar resources. Similarly, for things like irrigation, we assume that irrigation would largely be getting pumped during the day to take advantage of strong solar resources, maybe with a small dip during the middle of the day at the highest peak of temperature to ensure no adverse effects on crops. Egg incubation, we assumed was fairly consistent and basically constant throughout the day, 24/7, because knowing if you're incubating eggs, you have to keep those at a very constant temperature. And then for refrigeration, we know a typical commercial refrigerator compressors will turn on maybe 2-3 times a day. And so we assumed a few peaks. And so we had to make some assumptions here in consultation with our colleagues from Kenya and Zambia who are part of this work to come up with these daily load profiles. But we're able to come up with these profiles that we then put into our model here. The other piece of this is looking at sort of community demand. And so obviously agricultural productive uses and microgrids aren't going to operate in a vacuum. You're going to have residential people living in residences there, other community demands, in addition to households, retail shops, schools, clinics, etc. And so we wanted to look at places not only where there was strong agricultural productive use demand, but also enough of a sort of population density and community base to help further anchor these mini grids. And so we took the screening process where we looked at only sort of the 90th percentiles worth of population across each country, took out areas that were already connected to the grid or maybe close to existing transmission, took out productive areas, and came up with about 500 to 600 sites, 546 for Zambia and 600 for Kenya, that sort of met these criteria that we looked at for these hypothetical potential mini grids. And so with these sort of screen sites, these now hourly productive use of agriculture demand curves, these community curves that we were able to add in, we put this all into the REOPT model. Again, that puts in various technology options, including renewable energy resources, includes some of these economic parameters. Down there at the bottom, this is kind of the missing piece that we aim to fill by developing these agricultural productive use demand curves. And from this output, basically a least cost microgrid for each one of these estimated sites. Here we have just sort of our initial results page that looks at, and what you can see looking at the difference here between column 1, which is if we're just looking at a residential microgrid where you only have these residential uses, versus, for example, column 3, which is looking at if we're tapping into some of these agricultural productive uses in a way that really only maximizes agricultural consumption during the daytime to help fill that sort of valley within these demand profiles. We do see about a 5% decrease here in the overall levelized cost, which is very encouraging. So we're able to reduce the cost, the tariff that a microgrid developer might have to charge to consumers while if we're tapping into these agricultural productive uses. And at the same time, which isn't really reflected in here, we're also able to create additional value addition for some of these communities by tapping into these productive uses. So we can see that we do see that sort of ultimate reduction in the levelized cost. And then finally, the last step, I think this is my second to last slide here, we mapped these out both for Kenya and Zambia, so we could start getting a visual picture of kind of where are these opportunities and where can tapping into some of these agricultural productive uses really make the most impact in terms of reducing the levelized cost of electricity. And so again, just final slide here, final closing thoughts. By tapping into these, what this work really showed is that by tapping into these agricultural productive uses, it does increase the overall size of your mini grid, but at the same time as increasing the overall size of a mini grid, you're reducing the levelized costs, so you're able to charge lower tariffs to consumers at the same time that you're unlocking some of these value addition opportunities that can really add additional economic value to the community. And importantly, that second piece is not even reflected in this work. So we really only looked at the business case for a potential microgrid developer and how these agricultural productive uses, just by the numbers, can help make mini grids more viable as a business enterprise for a developer. We didn't even begin to analyze what are the scale and scope of local economic benefits of these value opportunities, and so that will certainly be a next piece of this analysis. So with that, I know that was quite a bit, a lot to take in there again. We will share the slides afterwards. We will share the paper that goes into a lot of detail about exactly the analysis we did, what went into it. We'll have the recording, and of course, through AFCAP and the entire team, I and the others at NREL who really worked on and led this work are always available to answer questions and go forward. And I know we'll have a few more webinars teed up for this webinar series. So just wanted to provide sort of the initial glimpse at what we did at both this agricultural productive use mapping, as well as how can we use some of this to start estimating impacts on mini grid business. So with that, I will go ahead and stop, open it up for questions and discussions. And I know, as Sile mentioned, I think there's a few guided discussion questions for us to wrap up here. But thank you all.
Thank you so much, team. That was very interesting. Thanks so much for that presentation. Yes, so we can go ahead and ask away, question time. Yes, so I did see a few in the chat box, a few questions in the chat box. I'm not sure if those have been answered, but there was one that asked if any online course on how to use the tools. And
yes, absolutely. There are, and I can share my screen again real quick. I did pull up both tools. So both of these tools are online, are free and available. So the RE Explorer tool that has these maps You can go in, you can just go to re-explorer.org, or just Google re-explorer NREL and it will come up. There are a handful. If you click on this resources and trainings tab, you'll be able to get online resources on how to use the tool, webinars, etc. And then you can also go in, and as I mentioned, we have this breakdown, so you can go through and look at, okay, I'm really interested in cost of a milling, and look and see for the continent, where are there needs for energy for cost of a milling, or maybe I'm really interested in
Tim, you're not sharing your screen right now.
Nope, thank you, Andy.
There you go.
All right, appreciate it, thanks. So you can go in and look specifically at, for example, egg incubation here, if that's something you're interested in, or if you want to look just at cost of a milling, which is the one I just mentioned, you can look and see specifically where that is. So those are there. And then on the REOPT tool, you can just go to, again, just Google REOPT, REOPT, and you can come in, and similarly, there are a whole bunch of publications, as well as a help manual available to help guide you through this. So, yep.
And the YouTube videos as well for REOPT are also on the site and posted in chat here.
Yeah,
thanks, Andy.
right. Thank you so much, Tim. Yes, and thank you, Andy, as well, for responding in the comment section. I see you've dropped quite a lot of links for people to visit. So time-wise, we're a bit pressed, but I'll let Gemetro, I think, to ask his question because his hand was up. You can.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Are you hearing my voice?
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I feel to be honored here. I feel to be honored to take part in this outstanding program, and I'm highly happy. I have actually heard the whole presentation, and I found it's very interesting and outstanding for our continent in general, for my country in particular, which is called Ethiopia. Because I'm from Ethiopia, 85% of Ethiopian population is they're farmers from rural area. So the thing you have mentioned highly needed for my people. I have actually two questions in this regard. Who is actually supporting this organization? Second question, how actually deliver those material to my people, because they need electricity, they need agricultural or farm material, including everything. As you know, Ethiopia is actually performing in wheat production in East Africa. So my country developing this agricultural sector. So how can actually help our farmers? Because as far as I know, many farmers in Ethiopia, they use the traditional method in cropping land. So how can actually impose by the contemporary technologies? Yeah, thank you so much.
Great question. So on the first one, you asked who's supporting. So this work was supported by the U.S. Department of State, and State Department also helped support the Africa Climate Action Partnership. And then Sile and team here have done a great job of bringing in additional resources. So we also have the partnership with Club ER for the GGE-EA program that Harry had mentioned at the beginning. So there's a sort of a whole bunch of different organizations who are chipping in to support this. I think more importantly on the second question, in terms of how this can be done, that is a great question, I would say. This is a start. Obviously, joining a webinar, one webinar isn't going to change anything. But joining this, reaching out, I would say, please go ahead and reach out. You can follow up directly with me or reach out to Sile and the AFCAP team. And we have resources to be able to support sort of bilateral work in countries, including, for example, in Ethiopia. One of the things, for example, that we're planning to do in Kenya, we just were in Kenya earlier this week, looking at kind of next steps for this work that we're planning to do is maybe develop out sort of toolkit packets that can be given to folks working, for example, in rural electrification agencies, or for folks working with ministries of energy or Ministry of Agriculture, so that they are equipped with the resources, with the tools as they go out, so that they can go out into some of these communities. We certainly don't have the capacity to go out into the communities, but you all know your countries very well, you know the communities very well. And so trying to sort of package a lot of these resources into sort of an easy to consume toolkit that those who do have regular touch points and regular engagements with a lot of these communities have, so that they're equipped with, okay, what is a business case? Why do we care? What are the technologies? Not just, we can talk about irrigation pumping, we can talk about cost of a milling, but specifically, where do you buy a cost of a mill? What is the hardware? You know, what does this actually look like? And so that's sort of the next step here. And we're very keen to get your input as well. And as a member of the Africa Climate Action Partnership, in helping us craft what sorts of materials would be most useful. What are the questions that you see maybe being asked in these communities, that we can make sure that we're really targeting development of sort of some of these follow-up resources to meet those needs.
Yeah, thank you so much. So you answered very well. I'm always there to help you, to cooperate you in helping my community. This is all about. Thank you so much.
Super. Thanks, Commissioner.
Okay.
Thank you. Just one person for questions, and then if anyone else has questions, you can just drop them in the chat box. You can go ahead, Enoch, and then we're going to be headed over to our discussion session, which we will have 4 guided questions, which we've dropped in the section in the chat box. So in the meantime, if you don't have anything to ask in this session, you can just go to the session here. We've asked these 4 questions, and then you can drop your answers. And then when you get there, everyone has actually thought about that when you get there.
Right, thank you. So my question is primarily focused on the basic mini-grid model. So my name is Enoch Ejapong. I focus as a consultant and a developer and a sustainable development consultant in the space here in Ghana. And I've been working in the space and noticed that particularly when you talk about mini-grid development, there's always that context between should it be private sector led or government sector led. So it's interesting to know exactly whether your analysis sort of touched on these 2 strands, and then what you have to say about it, at least gleaning from your basic business model.
Great question. And the short answer is we did not look at that. So the analysis that we did really is independent of whether this is a public or private sector led. It strictly looks at the economics. And if you're in a private sector investor, of course, those economics are really important because that's your main motivator. If you're a government, you have to think about these economics too, because then you get into a situation where maybe you're over reliant on other donors, or getting into a situation where the government's underwater. There's been a lot, unfortunately, going on in, for example, Kenya right now. We got into some of these issues, and so we didn't look at government versus private, but the economic case, regardless of if the government is the investor or private sector is the investor or donors are the investor, the economics don't change. That economic picture is the same. I think we also generally don't have, we as a U.S. national laboratory aren't really allowed or supposed to be advocating for one or the other. I think it does depend on sort of the country context. Different approaches will work different in different countries, oftentimes because of the way that the government is set up, or because of cultural differences. I know, for example, in Ghana, there's a very strong public-led approach. Nearby Nigeria takes a very different private sector approach. I think both have seen seen some progress, and so I don't think there's one is better than the other. I will say what we see is that an approach that allows for more private sector investment frees up a whole lot more capital for this. And so there are a lot of benefits to taking an approach that includes the private sector. The private sector typically has a lot more money than governments do. And so that is a really strong benefit of taking an approach that, if isn't private sector driven, at least has space for the private sector to invest, takes more of a private sector sort of friendly approach, and kind of includes considerations that makes it easier for the private sector to participate, can definitely free up a lot more capital to accelerate the pace of mini-grid deployment.
Right, and a quick follow-up. In that case as well, based on how your project is set up, are you getting data sets for, and what's the scope of the countries you're dealing with in Africa? That would be helpful to note, especially if Ghana is included.
This work looked at just sub-Saharan Africa. We did the pilot work with Kenya and Zambia. We have scope to work with any of the sub-Saharan countries for the work. So if there is interest, for example, from Ghana and actually.
Okay.
Similar sort of screening analysis for Ghana than as we did for Kenya and Zambia. So I'd love maybe not to follow up and we can talk about maybe what something like this for Ghana could look like.
Right, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Super.
Right. Thank you so much, Tim, and thank you, Enoch, as well. There's one question that is in the chat box, but can you please answer it in the chat box, Tim or Andy? Actually, I think Andy just answered it. It was Amos' question. So next slide, please, which will be our discussion. Great. So just quickly, in our opinion, in your opinion, who should be at the initiative of developing productive uses? Is it agencies, developers, communities? And I feel for this question, we should actually have something to say because it's your opinion. So if you have any answer or you have an idea who you really think should be at the initiative of developing productive uses, please raise your hand, or you can answer in the chat box. And then it's also followed by the question, which is what are the most common applications for PU in mini grids? And then we also have, do you have any examples for countries or developers that have successfully implemented PUE? And then the last question is, which strategies for scaling up PUE solutions we can maybe look at? So yeah, that's the question. Those are the questions for our discussion, and please feel free to raise your hand or answer in the chat box. I might pick on like one person at least. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is, I saw that we had, I actually wrote down, was it Judith? It was Judith, I think Ibanez, if I'm not pronouncing, sorry if I'm pronouncing your surname incorrectly, but do you know in your according to your experience, what are the most common applications for PUE in mini grids that you've come across? Or if anyone has worked with PUE applications, you can let us know what the most common ones are. Hello? Can everyone hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Oh,
Yes, you're loud and clear.
Okay. So nothing here at all? Okay, that's fine.
I think on the first question, maybe I can chime in, and kind of aligns to the question that Enoch had just raised about private versus public sector, and even Gameshu before that about how we actually get this out into the communities. I wish there were a clear answer, but from my perspective, it does, I think, really depend, and it can be any. It can be something that's led by the private sector if there's a really strong business case to be made. One of the reasons we did a lot of this analysis to help guide the private sector to where might there be a stronger business case. For the government, oftentimes that's maybe more in terms of where is there political will to go out. And then certainly I think some of these we often see it can be a grassroots community driven effort. So I think it's really whoever has the energy and political will to go ahead and take the initiative. But yeah, those are my personal views.
True, definitely. We have one comment in the chat section. It's Mbao Abang saying that I think I've experience in PU applications. Do you maybe want to say something, or that's all you wanted to say? Okay, we also have Sharia's hand up. Yes, you can speak.
Hello.
Yeah.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. My name is Shareka Avo from Zimbabwe. I think on question number one, like what has been said by the earlier intervention, it's not as clear as to say we can say that one group can do it, because the scenarios are different. We need to have the government coming in also when we are looking at the issue of energy access and also equity in terms of the cost of bringing energy to the people. So you find out that government has to come in, as well as agencies, maybe raising funds from development partners and donor funding to get grants, maybe to bridge the gap between the costs of energy, so that it is not too expensive for the people in the rural communities who are also very vulnerable. And also maybe the issue of pushing the political mileage also may come in, but there's need for some subsidy for those mini grids to be more viable. So we can also have private players coming in, mainly because they've got the money, but they cannot do it on their own if we want to push the issue of equity in terms of energy access. So I think this one is not like a cast in stone that we can say we can only have private developers or we can have only the communities, because they also need to be involved, yes, but they may not be able to do it on their own, especially the communities. They will need support from developers as well as from agencies. So that's my thinking along that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharia. So basically, all key players need to be involved. We have a hand from Amos. You can go ahead and speak.
Right. Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I think I totally agree with Sharia. Yes, I think you've actually said exactly what I wanted to say, but just to highlight the fact that from my experience or from our experience here in Ghana or in many other countries across Africa, it's clear that when it comes to energy access, or as you rightly put it, and I'm happy with the framing of productive uses of energy, not just providing access to people, but ensuring that there is some economic value that's actually being generated from it. But even within that, I would still contend that there are still so many variables that go into defining exactly what is productive uses. And it is in defining those variables, going into the details of that would tell what would be the best, or who would be the best to actually initiate, and how does that person ensure that it actually, or the initiative actually meets that productive uses, that, or the end product that you are seeking to address. Because when you look at it, even from the perspective of income generation for who? Is it for the government? Is it for the communities? Is it for individuals? Or is it for private energy providers or independent power producers? Because in the case of Ghana, I mean, what we realize is the people who actually need, or where we need to emphasize when it comes to productive energy users, is at the community level, or as your study looked at in the agri sector, because agri happens to be one of the main contributors to our GDP. But I think there is also an element of financing over there, and as the Sharia put it, if communities initiate it, they'll definitely need some form of financing. And then, so where is the financing going to come from? Is it going to come from government, or is it going to come from the private sector? Because wherever that financing comes from would again determine exactly what the outcome is going to be. if a private investor decides to put in the financing, the emphasis is likely to be more on income generation from the private entity or the power producer than that of, or rather pushing for the interests of local farmers, for instance. So I would advocate that, yes, of course, financing is central to productive uses of energy. Policy is central to productive uses of energy, and so we need that collaboration. But I would advocate that in terms of initiating it, I think it will be best in the context of Ghana, it will be best in the context of Africa to actually advocate for building the capacity of local communities to actually take control of initiating their own energy systems that meet their unique needs, and that is also tailored to their capacity in a way that it's not just a question of providing energy to communities who, in a situation where they're actually it's not actually contributing to their to any income generation outputs, but just for other uses. So I think it is best if the local communities themselves are given the capacity to actually be able to first develop the expertise, be able to pull in the financing, be able to work within a suitable or convenient policy framework, and initiate it themselves, finance it, and control the production as well as the distribution and the management of the utility services. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have time-wise, we are really stretched. I see Tim says that he has to drop off. Yeah, so I'll just let one or two people speak, and then after that, we unfortunately will have to close and wrap up the webinar. Sorry if I'm going to say your name wrong, but Mbao, and then there is Binta. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Can you hear me?
Sure, you can speak.
Yes, I'm Boa Augustine from Cameroon. I want to thank the presenter of the wonderful model we have just seen. In my country, the energy sector has been liberalized, so green energy or renewable energy has a role. But as a conservationist, a wildlife biologist, I work with protected areas, and I had the experience where we invited a donor from Germany. They came with a solar dryer where the cocoa of our communities inside and out of the protected area, they were trained and able to train how to mount a solar dryer that goes and goes and add value to their cocoa. So much so that even before we had these high cocoa prices, some few years back, they were the people determining the price of their cocoa. So I think it's a very good, it's an applauded effort. It's a wonderful thing that the Africa partnership is bringing up. Guys come to green energy. So I just want us to focus, to look at these protected areas, because in protected areas, like in my country, we have 22%, about 22% of the surface area is protected areas. So these are communities that they need this energy. But now the approach, as I said, the one that we use, the donor came, and these guys were trained, and they managed a solar dryer. They were able to follow the different level, the different steps of processing their cocoa, processing their cocoa up to the level of selling it. So it's a wonderful experience, and I think that if we look at each country's specificity, we were able to adapt the approach, and I will come out with something. So this is just my contribution. as a wildlife biologist, we are working with protected areas, and they really need this. I was happy what the man from Ghana said. Communities need to own it. How do they own it? Their capacity need to be built. If they build their capacity, they take the lead, we will see good results, and it will actually improve their life. We live in communities that the protected areas, the issue of climate change, they are caught in the middle. They don't have access to energy. Climate change are come. They are restricted to protected areas. They are restricted. So if they can come with this thing and work with these protected areas, I mean, in my case, it will be very beneficial. So I'm very grateful. I like the approach. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bao. Harry, I see your hand is up, and then from there, I think we will have to close the webinar.
Yes, thank you, Sigle. Thank you also, team, for your simple introduction to our webinar series. Team spoke about Kenya. I would like to talk about the tea farm, the tea factories in Kenya. As you know, in Kenya and in Uganda, tea activity is very in center of these activities. And for example, in some countryside, yes, the mini grid powered by micro hydro is dedicated to the tea factories. And in the evening, the power goes to the households for lighting. So all people in these households are employees to the factory. So we can have this kind of circular activities during the day. The power goes to the tea factories, and in the evening the power goes to the household. So we can have this kind of distribution of electricity. So I think it's a good experience for it's a successful power utilities for electricity in rural area. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harry, for your comment. One last person, could you please just keep it short? Binta, you can speak.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to have participated. Unfortunately, my internet connection was terrible. I was in and out of the webinar. And so my point is regarding the last question, which strategy for scale and PUA solutions in sub-Saharan Africa? So my question to the panelists and discussants will be, what are the strategies that you've explored regarding integrating higher education institutions, HEIs, because that's my area. So have you explored the innovative solutions from academic and research? Because there is a lot of work already looking at those angles and aspects, but people lack the way to translate these ideas into solutions that can be beneficial to productive use of electricity. So this is my point. I would be interested to work in such initiatives in any of the West African country. So very nice presentations. Thank you for the webinar, and I look forward to the slides. Very important.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your question as well. I think Harry, maybe in the chat box, can answer if there's any strategies that have been explored. And I'm not sure if Andy maybe has some information with regards to Tim's presentation, if there's any strategies that have been explored, but definitely be sharing, we'll be sharing the presentation. I'm not sure if Andy.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Sila. Sorry.
No problem. I wanted to ask if I'm not sure if you want to.
I can answer. So what I think will be best, Vinta, is if we share some materials with Sila to go out to everyone when we share the slides. In short, yes, there is a great need to scale partnerships with universities, and particularly to do more applied demonstrations. So whether this is on agricultural technologies or like greenhousing or agrivoltaics or a variety of these things, this has been done a little bit, but it is starting to grow more, and there is need to grow it even more than what we have done. I'll share some with Scylla, and she can share it all with the other materials, but would love to have a further discussion with you on that.
Thank you, Andy. That was short and sweet. But yeah, definitely we'll be sharing more information. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our webinar today. Thank you so much to everyone who actually took the time to join the webinar today. So we will be having another webinar, which is coming up soon, and we're going to be sending out communication. So please be on the lookout for the second webinar. But for now, thank you so much to everyone who attended